I never thought betrayal would echo like the strike of a judge's gavel. But when the words rang out, case number 5473, Anderson versus Anderson, it hit me. My parents weren't trembling out of guilt. They were trembling with excitement. They were suing me, their own son, to take away the house I'd bought and rebuilt after my divorce. The same house they now insisted was meant for my sister, Lily. From across the courtroom, my mother would meet my eyes. My father looked as though he dressed for a celebration. Lily sat between them, face soft with practiced sorrow, tears falling perfectly on cue. They had convinced themselves I didn't deserve to keep something they wanted. That was their first mistake. 3 years earlier, after my marriage fell apart, I'd returned to our old neighborhood and bought a rundown craftsman home. I spent months restoring it by hand, every board, every coat of paint. To me, it was more than a house. It was a second chance. My parents called it sensible. Lily called it charming. I called it home. They visited often, bringing advice I hadn't asked for, borrowing my tools, hinting about how Lily and her fiancé, Ryan, wanted a place nearby after they married. I brushed it off until the day my mother said, almost casually, it would be poetic if this home stayed in the family for Lily. I laughed. She didn't. That's when I began noticing the strange little things. Documents my father left on the counter. Questions about my mortgage, calls from a local appraiser who claimed to be updating property records. By the time I realized what they were doing, it was too late. My father's lawyer had quietly filed a claim stating that my down payment came from a family trust, one my parents controlled. Their argument, since it was technically their money, the property belonged to Lily. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I just observed. I let them keep up their Sunday visits, their cheerful phone calls attending concern, and I played along, polite, composed, recording every word, every careless admission that the so-called trust didn't exist when I bought the house. But I knew I needed something stronger, something they couldn't twist. It came from someone they hadn't considered, my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was quiet, observant, and sharper than most adults. One night, she sat at the dining table, tapping on her tablet. "Grandma said you'll have to move soon," she murmured. I froze. She said that? Emma nodded. She said this is Aunt Lily's real house now. I recorded it. Want to hear? When she pressed play, and I heard my mother's voice whispering that poison to my little girl, I knew exactly how this would end. The day of the hearing arrived quickly. My parents' lawyer told a story of generosity gone wrong, that I had used family trust funds to buy the property, that it had always been intended for my sister. They only wanted to return it to its rightful owner. I stayed quiet while the judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, asked for evidence. My father slid a folder across the table. She flipped through it, unimpressed. "These are in signed drafts," she said flatly. My father began to sweat. "The agreement was verbal," he stammered. "Verbal," she repeated, her tone colder now. Then it was my turn. I stood, straightened my tie, and said, "Your Honor, before I present my defense, my daughter would like to show you something. She's 7, but it's relevant." The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Emma walked up with her small tablet, her hand steady despite the weight of every eye in the room. "Can I show you something my grandma said?" she asked softly. The judge smiled faintly. "Go ahead." When Emma pressed play, the courtroom filled with my mother's voice. "Don't worry, Lily. Once your brother's gone, we'll tell him it's for his own good. He never appreciated what we did for him anyway." Then came my father's voice. "He'll give in. He always does." Followed by my sister's. "Good. I want the house before the wedding. It'll look perfect in pictures." Silence. The kind that burns. The judge leaned forward. "This was recorded in your home?" "Yes, ma'am." I said, "My daughter recorded it on her own." The unedited file and its metadata were submitted this morning. She nodded slowly. "Then I've heard enough." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case dismissed. The property remains in Mr. Anderson's name. I'm also forwarding this to family court for a possible fraud investigation. My parents sat frozen. Lily began to cry, not from remorse, but shock. I knelt beside Emma and whispered, "You did perfectly. When I stood again, my father finally spoke. You think you've won? I met his eyes. No, I proved you lost. They left without a word. That night, the house was silent, too silent, but it was mine. Every wall, every nail, every inch of what I'd restored stood as proof of something they could never claim again. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks through the small, steady voice of a child, and that's loud enough to shatter generations of control. I looked around the living room they once called temporary and smiled. They wanted a house. I built a fortress.